guys, today I'm super excited because we have a guest. I would say, Rishi, probably we had like 3 or 4 guests in over 45 episodes. So we always want to make sure that every time we bring a guest, it's a particular guest that can bring a lot of value to the discussion to talk a lot about, interesting concepts. And today we have Jason Keough. Hi, Jason.
Hey, thank you. How are you? Good to be
Good,
here.
good. So I want to talk briefly about how you and I know each other, Jason.
Sure.
You worked at Spiro for a while. I worked at Spiro for a while. So we only kind of like cross path for only like a couple of months.
Yeah.
And basically, I remember, in our first conversation on Zoom when we introduced each other, we talked about our background and so on. And I was absolutely fascinated by your background because I've never heard anybody doing the job that you were doing. So I remember then scheduling another call with you because I wanted to learn more about your experience. So now that Rish and I have the show, I said, well, let's invite Jason to talk about his background and his experience. Do you want to talk about why it's super interesting what you have done in the past, specifically in the airline industry?
Yeah, sure. So currently, I'm the manager of experimentation and growth for Gartner Digital Markets. But where my airline and travel industry experience was with Allianz, and this goes all the way back to 2007. And at the time, Allianz, well, there was a company called Mondial Assistance. I don't know if anybody remembers that company, but Mondial Assistance was a big global travel insurance and assistance company. Anyway, they had a U.S. office here in Richmond, Virginia, where I live, and they were selling travel insurance online, but it wasn't dynamic, and there wasn't any testing or anything going on. And so a couple of the executives decided to form a separate division for and build a custom A/B testing platform. At the time, there was no Optimizely, there was no Optimize. There wasn't really very many or any tools out there that did that. So they basically built their own. But Allianz, Mondial, which became Allianz, had exclusive long-term contracts with all the major airlines like American, Delta, United, JetBlue, so on. But they also had contracts with Orbitz, Cheap Tickets, car rentals, Priceline, Ticketmaster. So you can imagine like all of the transactions that occur on each of these websites. It's a lot of volume. A major part of their business. So they were, as most insurance companies, very old school paper driven. And around 2007, they were really paradigm shift to everything online. So building this early A/B testing platform used web services to make calls back and forth to the airlines. And this is kind of important because what really happened is they created a space on their site, a unique div tag or an area in which they would house the insurance offer. And what they would do is using web services, they would send a packet of information to Fusion, and Fusion had a rules engine and a segmentation engine that bucketed that particular user. And also within that bucket or segment, each had a specific offer that you could then A/B test. And that offer was sent back to the airlines and placed on their page within 500 milliseconds. So in between pages, when a user is checking out on an airline website, for instance, you put in a certain amount of information, where you're going and how many people and that type of stuff. And then you get to a certain point where they have placed the travel insurance, which is usually on the last page or next to last page. So a fair amount of data has been collected up to that point. They sent that to Fusion in between the page load, and Fusion sent back to them a blob of HTML that they placed on the page. So we had full control all the time, full control over a portion of their page that had the offer. And the very unique part of it is that because Allianz had partnerships with so many competitive airlines, once we were able to show the value of being able to do A/B testing, which they had never done before online, ever, none of them. We showed them how to do A/B testing with just the insurance offer. The other airlines just, they all wanted in, because once they find out that their competitor is doing something, they want to do the same thing. And also, as we did tests, we were able to leverage the learnings from one airline to another, because even though a lot of times, yeah, certain airlines did behave differently, their customers are slightly different. When it came to insurance, most travelers perceive insurance the same way, whether it's one airline or another. And so the really great thing is being able to provide, what worked over on one airline to another airline without really telling them anything more than, yeah, this is kind of a working strategy,
Yeah, Jason, I want to make sure that because a lot of our listeners are more like in the retail industry, so they're kind of like familiar with the classic retail model. Do you want to kind of like explain why an insurance offer is so important for an airline company, and kind of like maybe like mention the concept of like ancillary revenue, and maybe like a brief, literally like a very brief mention around how the business model of the airline industry has changed, and how now ancillary revenues is super important.
Right. So, well, basically the airline margins are typically really low, and a lot of them are tied to fuel costs and other types of things. So pilot shortages, rising costs, decreasing revenue, all that kind of stuff contribute to these low margins. However, the margins for ancillaries are really high. And so airlines, the profitability of airlines rests on their ancillary strategy more than anything. So it's incredibly important to the airlines. And even more so, insurance is because it's a completely separate product that once the airline put the offer, like integrated with Allianz or Fusion, they didn't have to do anything. They just sat back and made money. It was just literally a pipeline of money into the airline. They didn't have to do anything whatsoever, except allow us to do A/B testing, which they loved.
Yeah, because it's not an airline company that delivers the insurance services, right? Like
That's right.
in case your luggage gets lost, or in
Mhm.
case you have a health issue during the travel, it's not the actual like American Airlines that
No,
fulfills that service to the passenger, right? It's
that's right.
the actual insurance company. So it's kind of like an affiliate deal between the airline and the insurance company, right?
Yes. And the airlines, the revenue share is very high. I won't get into the specific numbers, but it's very high to the airline itself. So extremely, profitable. But in general, like the airlines originally bundled everything together.
Mm-hmm.
When you bought an airline ticket a long time ago, you got to pick your seat, whatever seat you wanted. You got to take a couple of bags, right? All of this stuff was built into the price. And then the low cost airlines started to come out and sort of, break that up into different products that people could then opt into if they want. Otherwise, if you really want to stick it out and not and not have a great seat and not get any meal and not do this or do that, then that's why we're low cost. That became a very successful strategy for low cost airlines, and so the major airlines started to follow suit. And what ended up happening is they ended up breaking up their sort of product offering into ancillaries almost too much. So it went to the point where customers got frustrated that everything was being sort of, as they say, nickeled and dimed. So every little thing people were charging for. And it became a black eye on the industry overall. So now they have sort of found, and I think where we are today is in somewhere in a happy medium where there's more bundling going on. So there's still options for people, but they're bundles of options to make it seem less like they're being nickeled and dimed for every last thing. They have figured out through testing which products go better with others and the price of bundles and all that kind of stuff. So the whole bundling strategy is kind of where we are today.
Yeah, and I think it's I remember a few years ago, a huge scandal that came out in the media about Ryanair wanting to charge people to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
On a flight. And there's no freaking way that they're gonna charge people to go to the freaking bathroom just because the business model is to, as you said, make money off of other things rather than flight tickets.
Yeah.
You guys remember that?
I do, and that was definitely one of the things, one of the stories I think that was international sort of news, and it really got people thinking, like, this is too much, this is crazy, because originally they had done a lot of surveys and they had talked to people, and that's what people wanted at the time, but people didn't want too much of it. It was like there was no throttle there. They just went all in and broke everything up and started to nickel and dime. And so, but, insurance is still today, Allianz has the same sort of plugged in insurance model, and still today are optimizing the same space, which originally when we were optimizing, just imagine you're on a payment page, you're getting ready to check out for an airline, and maybe 1/5 of the page, there's a little box that travel insurance, yes or no, gives you some information about it, but it's basically just an option on the page. So there's not a lot of text there. There's some disclaimers that have to be there because it's insurance and everything, but it's, it looks like it's a part of the checkout process. It does not really look like an ad. It looks like something that you would need or not need for your trip.
Was travel insurance the main offer that you guys were testing, or was there anything else that the airlines usually test on either that page or multiple pages?
So yes, the insurance offer was the main offer, but for certain airlines that we had partnerships with, we did test other ancillary products. So things like upgrades, baggage upgrades, even seat upgrades, not necessarily testing the seat map itself, but the way that the bundled seat categories were displayed, and the price, and which one was at the top, and that type of thing. So again, it's very offer specific, radio button kind of a thing. Things like express check-in, priority boarding, even entertainment, movies and things. These are all things that you can opt into. Carbon footprint, branded credit card offers. But the thing about ancillary offers is they have to be relevant, number one, and they have to be done in a way that really limits the mental load, right? The cognitive load, because in essence, they're meant to be quick purchases that don't require much thought. It should be kind of the, candy at the checkout at the grocery store, all the big rows of candy right there when you're checking out. You don't really want to think too much. You just want to look for the Snickers bar and grab it and go, or something like that. Same type of thing with ancillaries. You have to be very succinct. Every word matters, all that kind of stuff. So, and of course, it has to be relevant.
Yeah. And do you want to kind of like, do you remember what type of experiments you guys ran on that page for different airlines? Was it like mainly like copy, like pricing? Do you want to talk more about that?
Oh yeah. So, I mean, we would test everything because we had full control of that area. And the insurance product was owned by Allianz. So there was a lot of interest in being able to test what product and which product's price were right for people. We did a lot of that. A lot of product price. And as a strategy, we focused on that first, actually, which made sense because if you're going to optimize something to a specific segment of people, you want to know what the product is first before you start optimizing the language and all the rest of it. So we did all that first, product and price, and then we started to get into everything from the header, value prop, to feature bullets, images or icons, any of the selection copy. So where the yes, no radio buttons were, yes, I'd like travel insurance, no, thank you. There was so much testing on the order of the buttons, every piece of language around that. And then when we got into doing different types of ancillaries, a lot of it had to do with arranging the elements on the page, which, if you were showing packages of 3 things, which order of display should be each of the packages, and so on. So really everything that we had control over, was fair game to test. And it was, there was a strategy to kind of understand bang for the buck, which elements were people really reading, which ones were they not. Once you found out that, there was a whole world opened up. So
yeah, it's interesting because a few weeks ago, Rish and I have recorded a video about something that we noticed in e-commerce, which is companies tend to do sales pitches about products on product pages, right? But I've never seen any company use a sales pitch for cross sells and upsells, right? But it sounds like the airline industry, like any airline company, is kind of like ahead of the curve, and they focus a lot on sales pitch on that upseller and cross sell page.
yeah, and it's because they have a captive audience too. It takes a while to do an airline transaction. It's not that quick. You've got to put some time into it, some thought into it. When you sit down to buy an airline ticket, you are focused. This is usually a decent, size purchase, money value wise. So you have kind of a captive user audience. There is a happy medium that you find of how much people are willing to read. It's not the bare bones minimum, which is kind of, in a lot of e-commerce cases, it's the bare bones minimum. Like, hey, if you bought this, you might also like these things. And it's a typical plug-in on a lot of CMSs and stuff like that. So, but in the airline industry, you've got, like I said, you have a captive audience. And if you're smart about what you're offering, there is a lot of value in these ancillary products for people. And they do like to pick and choose and understand exactly what they're getting, but not too much. Like if you're creating paragraph after paragraph of stuff, nobody's going to read it. That's across the board, any industry online. So it is the great thing about testing is those are the kind of things you uncover. You know, those are the learnings that you work towards, is how much are people willing to read, and where are they focusing on the page, and where are they dropping off, and just all that kind of stuff. So so it was a lot of fun doing these tests. And because of the volume that we had, Lorenzo, we could test really small changes,
Mm-hmm.
really small changes,
Mm-hmm.
1-2% lift, and have it be statistically significant. So we were testing, we were very methodical and had a learning agenda that was very specific. So we would attack it in a very methodical, incremental way. You know, one change at a time, understand the impact of that, and so on. And
Yeah,
it helped because it's still being optimized today. Just that little box on the page that had one headline, maybe an intro paragraph, a few bullet points, a product yes and no, and a footer.
Let
You would
me
think after a couple of years, you'd be able to optimize that box and you'd move on to something else. But they've in fact been optimizing it for about 15 years.
yeah,
that's a really good, that's one of my pet peeves, is that this is really one of my biggest pet peeves, is that, and I'm so glad you brought this point up, because you're talking about a tiny little box with limited number of variables, and you can still continue optimizing in 15 years. And I would say that a really, really good marketer could probably figure out a roadmap for the next 15 years and still extract value from it. And one of the things that I find very frustrating is that sometimes brands will do 1 or 2 A/B tests, 1 or 2 winning concepts in their product page, and say, well, we've clearly like, extracted all the efficiency we can. Where else can we focus our energy? I'm like, no, if this product is driving 40% of your sales or your profits, then I say, you hire a full-time person to work on it all the time, versus taking your attention to something else because they get bored. Well, it's not about what's exciting and boring, it's about what makes money. So I'm really glad, Jason, you brought this point. I'm going to ask you one question that's been kind of playing through my mind, because insurance is a very interesting concept. And I wanted to get your thoughts on, you talked about messaging and stuff like that. I'm a copywriter, so I want to get ideas for myself. I would imagine that, and it could go either way. That's why I want to get your input. What is your experience or your thoughts on using fear-based messaging for insurance? Does it backfire? Can it work? What are your thoughts?
It backfires to a certain extent. And the reason why I say that is people generally don't like negative messaging. So words like don't or no or anything like that. And again, people are scanning this stuff. They're not really reading it word for word. They're scanning. But words like don't, if you start a sentence with don't or a headline with don't, like don't travel without insurance, or something like that, those messages just didn't work. And what we found is it related to that sort of negative message. Even though overall it was like a negative message to show value, it's much better to focus on the positive. And the other thing is, it's more about the value prop and what it means to the customers and less about the features. So a lot of times, especially in ancillaries for airlines, they just want to know what is it going to do for them? What does it mean for them? How does it help them in some way? Not necessarily the insurance covers this and it covers that. It's like, okay, it covers it, but what story are you telling me about this? And so messaging like, get peace of mind, relax, have a more relaxing vacation, or have a more relaxing trip, or these are values that people are like, oh, I want that, as opposed to don't get caught on your trip with a broken leg or something. People are like, I don't want to think about a broken leg on my trip.
For me, the super interesting thing is that it sounds like in the airline industries there's more interest towards making more money off of ancillary revenue and optimizing that page rather than the conversion rate overall of the website, simply because ancillary revenue is more profitable in terms of, you know, like bottom line for the business versus tickets.
But they do both. You know, they definitely do both. And I mean, I was even told by people at Delta, which was the beta client for the initial Fusion platform, say that, you know, that if it wasn't for Fusion, like they wouldn't even have known about A/B testing or the value of it. And it was only a couple of years in, they decided, oh my gosh, look at how much money we're making just from the testing. They were already making boatloads of money from the product itself. But then when they saw a cumulative report of how much incremental revenue that we could prove to them was real and not just a projected number, because the way that we were measuring things, but that we're talking millions and millions of dollars of extra money just due to the testing. And so that opened their eyes to say, oh my gosh, we can afford to hire our own team. We can afford to go out and buy whatever the best tool is at the time to support that, because we proved it to them that they were earning money just based on the experiments.
Talking about different airlines, Jason, do you have you worked with any airline that you, or maybe you know of any airline that is kind of like, you know, like in the travel industry, for example, the top biggest player in terms of like experimentation that, you know, test everything and experiment with everything is like Booking.com, you know, retail, Amazon. In the video industry, there's like Netflix. What are, in your experience, or because of, you know, you've seen their funnels and you've seen their website, which ones are the airlines that are kind of like the kings of experimentation?
Oh, that's a good question. So it may be different now because I'm not as quite plugged into that. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but there were EasyJet and Ryanair, so internationally for sure, those two. And then one that stood out to me is Viva Aerobus, which is a Mexican airline. They pushed all the chips in on experimentation. They wanted to test everything, and it was just incredible, their appetite for experimentation. So, and they are also a leader in ancillary revenue as well, and they have adopted, you know, packaging like we talked about, bundles as opposed to breaking everything up. But then they also now have a limited amount. They used to have a whole page of ancillaries that you could go and tick off. I mean, there must have been like 15 of them, and that was just too much for people. So they have found sort of this happy medium that they're now testing within. That's a lot less.
Makes sense.
And of course, on the US side, all the major ones, you know, American and Delta, they all do end-to-end customer experience experiments using different tools. So, and then of course the Allianz tool is sort of stuck in the middle, which is really interesting from an entire customer experience. But they somehow they coexist, having, you know, them doing experiments with a completely different tool on different pages, and then, you know, Allianz doing experiments just on the insurance on that one page. So
yeah, the interesting thing about this concept of ancillary revenue is that you know, other type of businesses are kind of like playing the airline playbook. I've seen, for example, car rental companies using the same process of introducing ancillary revenue in order to you know, add another income stream to their bottom line. But also, like, for example, Expedia.com, what I've seen they do very well, I don't know if they're still do it, But before COVID, one day I went to Valencia, no, not Valencia, sorry, to Sevilla with my girlfriend, and she bought the tickets, the airline tickets through Expedia. And what they've done very, very well, and it's very, very clever in my opinion, is that they introduced third-party offers called experiences in their funnel. And she bought this kind of like a cooking class, paella cooking class in a restaurant in Sevilla. So now Expedia makes a cut from that service as well, to kind of like as an affiliate offer to increase the average order value, the kind of like to add more money to the classic like flight ticket, which I thought it was very clever. So it sounds like the airline industry is being the pioneer, like the airline companies are being the pioneer of this ancillary revenue, and different type of companies are kind of like trying to copy the playbook. I know Airbnb is doing something similar with experiences and so on, and I thought it was very clever. When I see something like that, guys, I always think about, okay, how can one of my clients learn from that? How can I bring, something that is from an industry, kind of this concept of cross-industry, learning, and bring it in their own industry. Jason, I wanted to ask you, what do you think could be like something interesting, similar to the concept of ancillary revenue, that maybe like an online retailer can introduce in their business as a kind of like a additional income stream?
Well, I mean, if you know your business and you know your customers pretty well, then you should have an idea of the types of products that make the most sense to sort of pair up with your primary offering or product. So, if you're selling shoes, then you should be selling socks too. Or, if you're selling dress shirts, you should be also selling ties. And you don't have to manufacture the ties, but what you could do is form a partnership with another company, and you can integrate a suite of products somehow into your website. And you'd be surprised, like, all the successful e-commerce websites have some ancillary revenue strategy these days. So if you're not thinking about it, you sort of should be thinking about it, because there's always products that go with something else. You can always think of something that's valuable.
Yeah, to me, this is very interesting, because, in a era where now the cost of acquisition has been skyrocketing because of a lot of different reasons that we're not going to go into it. To me, introducing a partnership offer into your e-commerce, into your funnel, is extremely interesting, because you can actually make money in a different way, and with an offer there's sometimes it's more profitable, and allows you to also have the cash flow, because obviously the e-commerce, the number one kind of like challenge of the e-commerce industry is that it's very cash intensive. So making money with an affiliate offer or a partnership offer allows you to get instant cash that you can reinvest either in, to buy inventory, or to market, to buy, advertising and market your e-commerce better.
Yeah, and one other sort of strategy that seems to hold true, I think, for ancillaries that I've noticed is, people don't like to be sold to. And so the presentation of an ancillary offer should not look like an ad. Like, don't make it look like an ad at all. If you make it look like it is a part of a product offering that's standard on your site or in your checkout flow, you're able to add a product with that makes sense. So it is about placement. There's a lot of the value and the profitability around the placement of ancillary offers too. It's got to be both relevant and placed in the right place to be successful.
Interesting.
Like, you can't throw up an ancillary offer too early in the process, because they haven't even made their decision on the primary product yet, right? So you got to be smarter about how you offer additional products, I guess is my point.
Cool. Rishi, I asked a lot of questions. You got anything else to ask to Jason?
You've asked all the good questions, so you've stolen all the good questions. But I want to get Jason's perspective on. I'm very interested in counterintuitive insights, like things that maybe that your team experimented with, where you thought this is gonna really do well, but it actually did really bad, or something that you said there's no way this is gonna win, and it did really well. And you don't have to be specific, but just some anecdotal stuff would be quite fascinating. I love counterintuitive stories.
Sure. So I have a couple of examples of some tests that we ran with Ticketmaster. This is for event ticketing insurance. So similar to travel insurance, covered the cost of your ticket for kind of the same medical reasons and so on. And as you know, Ticketmaster is a huge company, lots of volume, and we could again test really small changes. One test was, the initial offer that went out had an icon on the left side of the offer that had, it was basically language that said protect your ticket, and it had a check mark icon next to it, protect your ticket. So it was a graphic version of that. And we just thought, well, let's just try taking that image out. And people were like, no, it looks great there. It's a perfect complement to this offer. Like, why would we test that? Like, what is your hypothesis? And my thought was, I don't know if it's distracting people from the purchase itself. So the offer was kind of a long offer, lots of copy, and the icon was towards the top. At the bottom of the offer is where you made your selection. Yes, I want to purchase, or no. Just a simple radio button selection. So we tested without the image, and it was a huge win. It was a huge, over $1 million in incremental revenue by just taking the image out. And nobody wanted to test it, but when we tested it and showed, they were like, well, I still don't like the way it looks, but I sure like that revenue. So we'll keep that in, we'll keep it out. But one of the reasons why we thought that really worked was it took their attention away from scrolling down and sort of getting to the radio button selections. It forced them to concentrate more on the copy and less on the action, and that was really the thing. So when they were just left with like a big paragraph of stuff to read, they didn't read it, and they went right down to the yes or no, and they would just select it and move on. So that, I thought that was a really good learning from that. That was not really very intuitive. Another test that we did was changing a slash, or changing the word per to a slash. So when you see something like $10 per ticket, $10 and then space and then per and so on, we just changed it to $10, the numbers, slash, and then the word ticket. And again, over $1 million change. And we're just talking about a couple of spaces even. But this was in a prominent location. And the hypothesis was that the price stood out more to people if it was separated. If you had the slash, it almost looked like one word. And because of that, we just had a lot more people that bought it, probably not even realizing it was $10. But it was just it was a bit of a deceptive trick, I suppose, in the end. But it it passed all the compliance and all that kind of stuff. And all we did, like I said, was just test the spacing. And so that was incredibly surprising to a lot of people. And it was, of course, all these are statistically significant results, 95% or greater.
Rishi, you're in the wrong business. You should start writing copy for airline companies.
No, it's really.
I'm kidding.
It's a really fascinating thing. It's amazing. It's amazing to think about, how words and the energy. I mean, really, at your level, Jason, because you are dealing with such massive volumes, one of the things that I think about is the energy and the personality of different words. And you can really start playing with that because you're talking about massive volumes. Whereas since we typically deal with much smaller volumes, that energy and that personality of each word doesn't really matter as much. But at your level, everything matters. And it's not just the design and the number of words, but it's actually the aesthetic of what a feeling that a word evokes, and they could be very subtle things and that I can't even think of right now, but I can imagine those things having a big impact.
Yeah, formatting. We did a lot of tests with bolding certain words or italicizing things just to make those words stand out just a little bit. Because again, people scan. And so if you've got a couple of bolded words, what are you reading? You're reading those two bolded words.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was incredibly fun to have that sort of palette as a test designer.
I think something that would be interesting is kind of like test different levels of adjectives to describe something, like, maybe like, I don't know, something like light. Maybe it's like a light adjective, and it's like extremely light, or I don't know, it's synonymous of light. But what I'm trying to say is like different levels to explain something with an adjective. Cool. Anything else, Rishi?
No, I think this covers everything. And I have so many more questions, but we'll save it for another time. But this is really fascinating. And it's really, I mean, it's like pure testing, right? In this purest form, because you have this one variable and you're just working on it, and you're just like working on it. I just love the discipline of working on just one thing consistently. I think this is great. Thank you for your time today, Jason. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. I want to leave the video with this episode with a question to the people. Based on this concept of ancillary revenue and based on the learnings from the airline industry, think about what can you experiment with in terms of revenue stream for your e-commerce or for your client. Because there's a lot of examples out there of companies that are doing it. I want to give one example of a company doing it, which is Wayfair, the home service, not so home service, home furniture companies. They're actually using the same playbook of the airline company, but for insurance on furniture. And they're not fulfilling that service. They're using a third-party insurance company as to fulfill the services. It's literally just an add-on, pretty much as a travel insurance. But in this case, it's insurance on an object. So think about how can you introduce an ancillary revenue into your business model and experiment with that. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jason. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.